we're going to take a minute to discuss how we're going to make problem A6 work. We have Alberta Einstein teaches a business class at Podunk University. To evaluate the students in this class, she has given 3 tests. It is now the end of the semester, and Alberta asked you to create a program that inputs each student's test score, so we need to get test scores in there, and outputs the average score for each student, and then later the overall class average. So when we look at this picture, it looks like we've got 3 test scores, so we can go T1, T2, and T3, and then we're going to figure out the average. So I'll just go A scores, S-C-O-R-E-S, and if I'm going to have to figure out the average scores, I know I'm going to have to total them up, because in order to figure out the average, we total all the scores up, and then we divide it by the number of scores, right? So I'll create a thing called T-scores. But as I look at this, it suddenly occurs to me that nowhere in this description that's right here does she require keeping track of scores. Well, in order for the output to make sense, because we do have the overall class average along with each student's score, it looks like I should really get the student's name as well. So these are the things that I need to look at. We don't need to keep track of the scores, so I can strike this out and just simply go score. So I'll use only one variable to keep track of the scores. And I'm hoping that that will make sense. Now, what we can do is discuss the whole process. Okay, now that we've gone through all the trouble to define our problem, what we need now to do is get our input to actually start writing our pseudocode. And I'm going to take my clue from example 6.15 out of your textbook, and that is everyone's exam averages, how to grab a hold of that. They've done a few more things in there than maybe we need to, but it gives you definitely the gist of everything. All right, so if you understand that example and you're able to pseudocode that into Python, then what I'm about ready to share you will be very, very easy to understand. So the first thing we want to do is get the person's name. So I'll go name is going to be equal to input and the prompt for the name, right? I'm not going to bother writing in all of that, what the prompt actually is. So the next thing that we want to do once we get that is we want to get our scores. Well, there are only 3 scores. So some people would say, well, let's just go S1 equals input, prompt, whatever the prompt is. S2 is going to be equal to input, prompt. S3 is going to be equal to input, and then some prompt. And then what they'll do is they'll say total is equal to S1 plus S2 plus S3. And then they're going to eventually just say average is going to be equal to total divided by 3. All right? Well, this isn't really the best approach to take. The reason is if for some reason the person ends up with more than 3 scores, changing this is not going to be easy to do. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and just delete that, all of that, and I want to start over. And the first thing I want to do is I want to say, what are the total number of scores, right? And I'm going to say total scores is equal to 3. I'm going to say, I want to get my input the name. So since I'm inputting name, I'm going to go ahead and declare name. And I'm going to set it equal to nothing. And I know that I'm going to have to get scores, so I'm going to only declare 1 score though. And I'm going to set it as 0. I'm going to declare total scores equals 0. And do I need to do average scores? Why not, right? So we'll declare that. Actually, this should be an A, and it shouldn't be an uppercase A. It needs to start with a lowercase a. So we'll go A scores is equal to 0. So I've declared all of my variables. And this is something that you have to do in many programming languages, but not necessarily in Python. DCL. We're declaring vars. So now that I've declared my variables, now I can start getting input. I can say name is equal to input, and then whatever my prompt is. We said before you could get one score at a time, but as you see from my variables that I've created up above, these critters right here, that I never created individual scores. That's because I plan on using a loop, because loops are much more efficient for something like this. So what I want to do is I want to use a for loop, and I'm going to go for I in range, and I have a variable called total scores that currently is set to 3. This means that this loop is going to happen 3 times, which is exactly what we need. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say score is going to be equal to input, and again I'm going to prompt for the score, and then once I get the score and I prompt for it and all that good stuff, I will add it to my total scores. So I'll go t-scores is plus equals score. So now I just added, the first time through, I added score, whatever this value is, to 0 because total scores is equal to 0. This is going to do this 3 times. So what do you suppose I'm going to have at the end of this loop? At the end of all this, well, I'm going to have a total of all my scores. Because I didn't have to keep track of them, I can just do it this way. Once I complete the loop, then I can say that the average score, I can go AVE or just average scores like I did up there, average scores is going to be equal to the total scores divided by total. I should probably have gone with total number of scores, but I'll go like this, total scores. Does that make sense to everybody? So we've kept track of the total of the scores, the total value, and I could just change that to value, right? Total value. And we divided it by the total number of scores that we have, which in this case was 3. So now what we have done is we have created a little section right here that goes through and collects and calculates an average for a single student. Once that's done, you're ready to write an outer loop that does nothing more than handles it for all of your students. Let's go ahead and see if you can't input this into your computer and make it work for a single student. Okay, so in the last video, we created the inner loop, right? And part of that inner loop is we got the name, and we ultimately ended up with the averages, right? For a single student, we ended up with an average for a single student, so we can get rid of the plural there. We ended up with an average for a single student, but we didn't bother to print the thing out. I forgot to tell you to do that, but we will deal with that in the outer loop. I know for sure that I'm going to be using the name as a flag because the sample Python interaction says to enter a student name or star to finish, all right? So that means I have to have name initialized to something to begin with before I even get into the outer loop. So the very beginning of my program, I have name. And I'm going to set it equal to, quote, no name. So now I have something that, makes clear sense. These two words together, no name, will never be part of a database or part of input or anything like that. So they end up becoming a really nice sentinel when I'm dealing with a while loop. Do we know how many names are in this class? And the answer to that question is no, because we gave the user the option to enter a star if it's finished. So we have no idea how many students there are, and if we're going to find the class average, we need to know that. So what we want to do is create a CTR, maybe CTR stands for counter, and I'll set it to 0. And the counter is going to keep track, and I'll use a little remark here. Keep track of the number of students. So we're going to keep track of the number of students with a counter of some kind. And I think that's kind of, oh yeah, let's go ahead and declare the class total. So I'll go C total. For the total scores, the total of all of the averages, I'll set that equal to 0. And we want a class average is going to be set to 0 because that's going to be the average score. With other programming languages, though, you must declare all of your variables. I figure in Python we might as well do it now. That way you're in the habit of doing it, okay? So let's come on down here and get that handy dandy while loop going. And the while loop is going to be while name is not equal to, and you have to look up in Python how to make something not equal to, right? Well, name is not equal to, quote, splat or star. You'll want to do the stuff on the inside. And the first order of business will be just like we had to do before with the inner loop, and that is we need to get the name, right? So name is going to be equal to input and some prompt to the user so that the user knows that he or she is inputting the name, all right? Once we've done that, we can finally make the big handy dandy test. This here test is whether or not we want to keep trying to get names, but this new test that I'm creating is whether or not we want to bother getting input in terms of scores. Name is not equal to, and I don't know if this is Pythonese or not, okay, is not equal to, quote, star. It means I get to go ahead and do my scores. And guess what? That is all of this stuff right here, right? Pretty much all this stuff here. So inside of this thing, I will get my scores. I will total the scores up. And when I fall out of this loop, okay, I will have a total score that I need to divide by 3. So the get scores is going to be part of the loop. Actually, I can go ahead and get scores, which includes the average and everything. So heck, why not just say get student average, score average, because that is in fact the inner loop. We're going to have available to me a student name and an average score. So now I can say that the average score, print the average score for whoever the name is, and then it'll be a score. That takes care of that. So we ended up with our handy dandy line of input for the average score for whomever. Since we know what the average score is, the A score is, we can start tallying that up. We can say at this point, because remember we're still into this if, we can say C score or class total is plus equals, in this course case, A score. So we're going through here, we're doing this while loop, we ended up accumulating total scores until we finally enter this asterisk, in which case, when this is finally set to an asterisk, we can then drop out of the if condition. Remember, it's going to skip this. So down here, we want to drop out of our while loop. And once we drop out of the while loop, I'm going to use a vertical bar to show where this if indent is, okay? When we finally drop out of our while loop, guess what we are ready to do? We are ready to take advantage of this total score and calculate our average, right? So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say C average is going to be equal to C total divided by the counter, right? Now, some of you guys probably noticed I never bothered to update the counter. So because of the way we wrote the code, though, this is really easy to do, because right here I can say CTR plus equals 1. And now it is updated. So there's the average, and now I can print class average equals C average. I'm hoping that this gives you enough to go ahead and complete this particular assignment. In a couple of days, I will post the solution.